Okay, we should be good to go.
Great. Well, welcome everyone to the December Housing Commission meeting. My understanding is that we do not have public comment for this meeting. So our first agenda item then will be approval of the minutes. Alex, I had a couple edits to the minutes. And the first one on page 3, let's see, it is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraph from the bottom. And the sentence is Jennifer Daniels answered, the county does not have that information. I think that should be changed as CPHD does not have that information, because I think the Office of Human Rights does have that info. And the same thing for the next paragraph where Russell said that is not data that the county has. I think that should be changed to CPHD as well, because I also believe that the Office of Human Rights has that information. So I think they just said we do not have that information, but not that the county overall does not.
Okay, I can make those 2 updates.
Thank you. And then on page 4, under rent stabilization, the 3rd paragraph down, where it says Colin McBeth said rent gouging and rent stabilization terminologies were both used because they have a slightly different focus. The next sentence is not what I believe I said, where it says rent stabilization may be more focused on the CAF units, while rent gouging may be seen more in the market rate units. So I think what I had said, and I didn't look back at the recording, but so rent stabilization is different from rent gouging. Rent gouging is sort of a higher cap and meant to sort of broadly stop like really high rent increases, where rent stabilization could be much more micro focused, like, you know, limiting to, let's say, 2% increases. So rent gouging, like, in my view, and I know that's difficult for you to just put in a sentence, but at least the way it reads now, I don't think that's what I was saying during the meeting.
Okay, I can make that change as well.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other edits to the minutes?
Yeah, I have one. It's a technical, where present is, you may want to delete the parenthetical virtually.
Yes, I can do that. I see that.
Yep. Any other changes? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the minutes with the amendments?
I can make a motion to approve the minutes with those corrections.
I
Thank you.
second.
Thank you. Any objection to approving the minutes? Hearing none, they are approved with those corrections. Thank you. So next item on our agenda, we have DHS, who's going to be talking about homelessness services and an update on many different aspects of it.
Yes, I can now turn it over to DHS staff, and I believe Trina, is that you?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having. I'm going to apologize in advance. I am struggling with a really bad sinus infection, but I'm here. And but if I start coughing, apologies. I think Nicole, you're going to share the screen. Perfect. Thank you. So I will, I know there were quite a few questions about our homeless response system, our performance, how we are supporting people experiencing homelessness in our community. I'm going to start by way of just a little bit of context setting so everyone understands sort of our community's plan and strategies to address homelessness. Nicole, you can go to the next slide. So for just over a year, we were involved in a community-wide strategic planning process, mostly in 2023, we had a number of community input sessions where over 100 stakeholders were involved in providing feedback about our current continuum of care, which is our homeless response system. Over a third of the people who participated in those sessions were also people with lived experience of homelessness. And really where we got to our current strategic plan is a way home for all, is based on the foundations of equity and best practice and 3 pillars of our homeless system: prevention, our homeless response, and housing pathways or housing resolution. So we are setting a very ambitious goal here by ending homelessness for all by 2026. You can go to the next slide. This is a visualization of our strategic plan, the COC, that is inclusive of people with lived experience, our nonprofit providers, government, different funders, different service providers in our community, the safety net community, affordable housing developers, and property managers. Helped us define this mission and 6 values to our strategic plan. And all of this work leads up and is in far more detail. I can put a link in the chat after I turn over the mic to where you can find the strategic plan, but helps us build to this overarching goal. Next slide. Just by way of some clarification, what does it really mean to reach an end to homelessness? So some of you may know that now for nearly a decade, Arlington County has been working with Community Solutions during implementing its Built for Zero initiative. So since then, we reached a functional zero for veterans experiencing homelessness. And now we've really pivoted and embraced a functional zero for all populations as a community goal. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to be able to prevent homelessness for everyone at all times, but what it really does is helps us operationalize this goal, meaning that essentially that if homelessness does occur, it'll occur rarely, it'll be of short duration, and typically won't reoccur. That's really what we're talking about when we're trying to reach a functional zero for all populations. And I mentioned we have a lot of partners that have been involved in the development of our strategic plan. Our COC governance, our continuum of care governance, is really the bodies, I would say a number of boards and committees that are charged with implementing our strategic plan. Each of these committees hold various bodies of work that ensure that our state and federal requirements are being met, that our strategic plan is implemented, and monitors our performance year over year. And as I mentioned before, this is a really inclusive governance structure from people who have been most directly impacted by homelessness, service providers from case managers through their executive leadership, volunteers, community members, and other funders and social service providers, both private and public entities. So I think at this point, I might turn it over to Dr. Venner. She oversees our Community Assistance Bureau, and she'll talk a little bit more about our centralized access system.
Thanks, Trina. Good evening, everyone. We operate what's called a centralized access system. In a sense, that just means we're the gateway to the front door for services. So anybody that has any housing crisis or technically any crisis comes into our front doors or calls, or we can do pretty much anything remotely as well, thanks to the pandemic. But we try to reach as much as we can at our front doors. So any household that is in crisis, they come into what's called a centralized access system. And a lot of the things that we do is, one is called diversion, which speaks for itself. We try to say, hey, what are the resources that you might have that other than entering shelter? We try to figure out what are some of the options, because when you're in some sort of trauma or anything that's going on, you don't really think of all of your options. So we try our best to divert people from shelter or homelessness. We try to prevent them from homelessness. We do our best to try to say, hey, what can we do to help you remain stable? And then we also have rapid rehousing, which we do through our partners. They have rapid rehousing funds. So even if when they enter shelter, sometimes even before they enter shelter, we try to rapidly rehouse them. We also have permanent supportive housing, both with our partners and at DHS. And then we have shelter. Shelter, we try to be the last resort. Today I was saying, we try to make shelter very, very rare. We try not to let people enter shelter because shelter in of itself is a lot for someone to go through. But if they should enter shelter or any of these things, we try to then direct them to stable and permanent housing. People don't have to enter shelter just to get any housing. We try to meet people where they're at to help them be stably housed as best as we can. Okay, so Trina, are you going to pick it up from here?
Sure.
Okay.
Happy
Thanks.
to. Thanks, Heather. So one of the things that our continuum of care monitors, I mentioned in our COC governance, we have a committee that evaluates how we're performing and how we're doing to prevent and end homelessness. We have objectives outlined in our strategic plan. Some of these requirements come from the Hearth Act, which was the reauthorization of the McKinney-Vento Act that really, from the federal level, pulls a lot of the federal resources to address homelessness across the country and sets the regulatory requirements that we need to meet. The Hearth Act stands for the Homeless Emergency and Rapid Transition to Housing Act. So a number of these performance measures, actually say all of these performance measures are performance measures that we track on a quarterly basis across the COC. The ones I've outlined here in red are ones that we're going to focus on moving forward. And I think the reason why I bring this up today too is because I think there's always a concern, right, of the people who are sleeping outside. We share that concern, absolutely. But to Heather's point, we really want to make sure that shelter is a last resort option. And so these performance metrics and what we have to do as a community to meet these and keep our eye on the long-term goal of helping people experiencing homelessness to access housing, which is really the solution to ending homelessness, is we have to be looking at these performance metrics on a regular basis to really reduce the length of time people are experiencing homelessness and as quickly as possible, fast track folks to permanent housing so that they can stabilize there. Nicole, you can go to the next slide. I'll start a little bit with just sort of the need. I think some of you may be familiar with our annual point in time counts that shows at any point in time once a year how the numbers of people that are experiencing homelessness year over year. I think this is actually probably a more I guess, robust view of what the need actually is in our community. It shows how many people we're serving each fiscal year across our various interventions. Don't add the pillars up because some of the people that are served in shelter are then served in rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. So you don't get, you won't get the right number that way. But roughly the last two fiscal years, we've served just over 1,000 people across the COC. That's an unduplicated number. But here you can see roughly how many people are kind of moving through the various interventions that we have in our COC year over year. Next slide. That last chart I showed you, the data is from our Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. That's the database that all of our partners use to enter data about the people that they're serving. This is our the numbers of domestic violence households in green and persons served in our domestic violence shelter that's operated by Doorways. We track this data in a different way because of privacy requirements that we have for serving and tracking people who are survivors of domestic violence. But you can see here year over year what the trends are. There's a slight dip in the number of people in FY24 that was served in our domestic violence shelter. But year over year since 2020, we've seen an increase in households served. Next slide. So here we're looking at our exits to permanent housing from emergency shelter. The blue slide is the exit rates for single adult shelters, orange from our family emergency shelter, excluding the domestic violence program. And you'll see a couple things. The orange bars the family shelters, our permanent housing rates are higher for families. That's largely because of the way the single adult shelters sort of operate. People are kind of coming and going more quickly and not necessarily having as direct a path to permanent housing as maybe the families experience. We're also just looking at smaller numbers in the family universe for our family emergency shelters. Majority of families that are, oh, I'll pause. Kellen, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, just can you, when you talk about exits to permanent housing, kind of what that means? So is that in the county, and so someone wouldn't be counted if they like went somewhere else, or does that mean that, like, looking at FY 2024, the other 49% of people, like single adult shelters who exited, they went back to being homeless, or we just don't necessarily have data on where they went? Could you just clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for families, I was just going to go there actually. So for families, I'll talk about them first because their path is a little bit more straightforward. It's typically through rapid rehousing. Some families will exit directly to a housing grant if they're eligible for that, but I would say the bulk of the exits to permanent housing are rapid rehousing. In some cases, you'll see families go to some people in families, I would say, going to different shelters. Last year, I remember Bridges telling me that they had a number of two-parent families that had to split up because of domestic violence that was occurring in the household. So that was a slightly different dynamic that they were experiencing. Some people returned to family and friends to try to figure things out on their own. But really, the majority of people are moving through with rapid rehousing resources and eventually transitioning to something like the housing grant. For single adults, so this is a proportion of exits, right? So it's not counting the people that are staying in shelter longer. So I would say the majority of the positive exits from single adults are also rapid rehousing, but we see permanent supportive housing being utilized more frequently for single adults than families. Permanent supportive housing, the distinction here is that a person has to have a disability and have kind of chronic episodes of homelessness. So they're typically more eligible in the single adult space for a program like permanent supportive housing. Single adults also will utilize rapid rehousing at a very high rate. Some people do move out on their own. The people that are moving out to non-permanent destinations may be returning to homelessness. We also see a large number of people who are moving into institutions like jail or hospital among the single adult population. Next slide. We also want to make sure that after we deploy something like rapid rehousing, that they're able to maintain permanent housing after the rapid rehousing assistance ends. So unlike permanent supportive housing, where the rental assistance and the services can be permanent, and our retention rates in permanent supportive housing are quite high, somewhere around 97% typically. Rapid rehousing, the intervention is by design slightly different. So the rental assistance is really meant to be short-term, case management short-term, up to 2 years at the very most, but it's you'll see shortly that it's actually less than that. And then the household then can remain in that unit, holding the lease in their own name, and then the house will either transition to another form of rental assistance if it's needed, if they're eligible, like a housing grant, and then the homeless services provider, the rapid rehousing service provider, will step back. And you'll see at the end of household stay in rapid rehousing in FY24, 93% maintain permanent housing at the end of their housing assistance. Next slide. And then this is an overview of how long it takes. So, and these are median months. The numbers are in median months. And we're on par with sort of national trends in this area for emergency shelters, roughly around 3 months stay. And then for rapid rehousing, which is that gray bar, anywhere between in FY21, it was quite low at 5 months, up to nearly 10 in FY 2022. But so hovering around sort of that 8-month stay in rapid rehousing, meaning that people are transitioning to their own units before their first year lease is up and able to maintain that housing on their own. Next slide. And then I think the other thing people get curious about is, well, how does it stick for folks? Are they able to maintain housing once, all these interventions are in place and then step back? So this is kind of a complicated metric that HUD has designed for us. So we report this using HUD system performance measure, which tracks it by federal fiscal year and the most recent data that we have, because it looks back 2 years of permanent housing exits within the past 2 years and how many people then have returned within that time frame. So we're looking at federal fiscal year 2022. During this time frame, our return rate was just 4%. So only 11 people out of the 248 that exited to permanent housing returned to homelessness within 2 years. This might creep up after 2 years. We don't track it that way because of the way that we have to follow certain metrics and requirements. But also after 2 years, there's also a question about whether someone's additional episodes of homelessness is tied to their original one, right? The more distance there is, we don't know if necessarily if there's a correlation between those recidivism rates. And we also are expecting that this number will go up though in the next couple of years because of where we are with the reduction in pandemic resources, the eviction protections that we had in place. So we'll be monitoring this as we have been, but we are anticipating that it would go up. I think that might be my last one. So I'm going to hand it over to Nicole Dula, who's our Housing Assistance Bureau Director.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us here. And so I'm going to close out our presentation tonight just to give you an idea of what our priorities are and what's on the horizon. I'd say the last 24 months for DHS, particularly in the Economic Independence Division, have been pretty intense. All of our community shelters are up for recompete. So just last spring, we put out, you heard of a super NOFA, we put out a super RFP where literally our family shelter and both single shelters, including outreach and other supports, have been offered up for bid. So the team has been very heavily involved in a number of proposals, and hopefully we'll be able to make some contract awards early in 2025. But just to give you an idea of where the county is moving. So for family homelessness, we did lose a provider that changed sort of service delivery model. So Doorways is focused now on primarily domestic violence services. So we've lost the family home shelter. So within the RFP NOFA for family services, the county owns and operates Sullivan House, which is a 44 bed facility. We are also looking at picking up the bed capacity or the service needs that Doorways did provide within family homelessness arena by offering a new look of non-congregate shelter / overflow. So this is something new we want to implement. It's also moving with the trends of non-congregate shelter versus emergency congregate shelter. So we're anticipating that this program will provide expanded shelter capacity for families on an as-needed basis, or where the needs are projected to increase. So with non-congregate, that means we're looking at either motel, master leased apartments with community providers. It may be short-term and it could be long-term into longer period managed apartment style settings. For our single adult homelessness, our housing services center is also up for recompete. This is a 50 bed capacity facility with 5 beds dedicated to medical respite. We are, of course, it would include day programming, which is offered at both of our single adult shelters. And then those services would include things like wraparound service to make sure that we're assisting clients in addressing their personal barriers to housing stability. Medical respite includes the 5 dedicated beds for residents that are experiencing homelessness, but who are recuperating from acute medical condition or injury. So, and that is under the oversight of a nurse practitioner. Similar services at the residential program center are up for recompete. And we're also looking at non-congregate shelter overflow opportunities for our single adults where where on an as-needed basis or real or projected needs that the community may experience from now until the next 5 years of these contract cycles. If should we have a need, we'll have the ability to develop either master leased apartments or should we need to engage motels, we'll now have these embedded within our homeless services providers. And then finally, our unsheltered homelessness, we're recompeting street outreach services for people who are sleeping in places not meant for human habitation. Through our street outreach, we're really looking for support that we can connect to those that are sleeping outside, developing rapport with those individuals, working closely with our behavioral health treatment on wheels, as well as our mobile outreach street team, MOS, that was recently set up within the last year. And really engage with community businesses, civic association and partners where people who are sleeping outside, getting the word out that we are in the community, that we can provide services and connect individuals to services, and really just linking the community to awareness of what Arlington County has to offer and how we can be a support to our local businesses and residents. So how to get involved, Trina previously showed a slide on our governance structure. It really is, the continuum of care is in a body of stakeholders, from private citizens to those who just have a passion for homeless services and wanting to get involved to support the strategic plan and its mission. So of any one of the number of the subcommittees that we have are open and available for members to subscribe to. So we have a formal application on our website. We welcome, if there's an interest or someone who's of interest who wants to get involved in this work, please, send us an application, and we'll get back to you on any one of the committees that you might be interested in. We're also routinely, posting updates and awareness. A lot of the stats, a lot of the figures that Trina presented today, we do quite a bit of reporting. So as things change and churn in homeless services, you can also stay tuned to those updates by subscribing to our webpage for any updates that from here and moving forward. And then our strategic plan that Trina started with earlier today, this is the exact QR code directly to that plan if you want to read about it in more detail. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Trina and Heather and Nicole, for that presentation. I appreciate you making time to be here tonight. And all the great work that you all are doing. It's such incredibly important work, and I know it's not easy work, so it is very appreciated. I have a number of questions, but I wanted to see if other commissioners had any questions first before I dived into mine.
Yeah, Callan, I have one. This was very good. I have 2 questions. One is, the recidivism, 4%, how did that relate to the national figure? Did they mention that, or did I miss that?
I can answer. I don't have the exact national figure at my fingertips, but that's actually 4% is quite low. And if I remember correctly from years past, it would hover somewhere around 10 to 12%.
Right.
So this last federal fiscal year, we were performing very, very well.
Yeah, no, that's what I thought also. And the other one is, this is all great as far, what is the county's nonprofit network outside that's assisting with all these goals? And I know of one, and I just looked them up on the web, Path Forward. I go to a
Yeah.
gym right across the street from where they operate. So how does all of this fit in with the nonprofit structure? And you mentioned Doorways. How many people are you dealing with?
Yeah, so Path Forward operates the Homeless Services Center and our street outreach. They also have a number of permanent supportive housing programs, and they operate rapid rehousing. New Hope Housing is another area nonprofit. They actually have a footprint in Alexandria and Fairfax County as well. But for Arlington, they operate the Residential Program Center that's on Columbia Pike. They also provide rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. Bridges to Independence is our now primary family homelessness service provider, operating Sullivan House. They also have provide rapid rehousing assistance. And then Doorways is our domestic violence provider and also has rapid rehousing assistance, both for people exiting homelessness and survivors of domestic violence. So we're talking about largely 4 nonprofits doing direct services. We have a few others that also provide prevention and other sort of safety net services. But those are the 4 that we primarily work with and are engaged in the continuum of care. And our team oversees the contracts for those homeless emergency shelters, street outreach, and day programs.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Zach.
Thank you. Just one question. I can't recall if it was Trina, you, or Heather that mentioned or that had a slide that showed the trend in the number of victims of domestic violence that the county has served. Do you know if that, I saw it was an increasing trend. Is that because of increasing capacity or an increasing need, or maybe a bit of both?
Bit of both is how Doorways explains it. They've definitely seen since the pandemic an increased need. They've also seen increased levels of lethality across the people that call their domestic violence hotline. But those increases are also seen across the country. But Doorways did expand their reach by providing hotel services, particularly during the pandemic, as well as created some master leased units for safe housing, still shelter, but in apartments across the county. So they were able to not, I don't think fully meet the need, but they definitely did see more survivors through their programs. And then we were also able to compete for and receive new bonus funding from the federal competition for our continuum of care, specifically for survivors of domestic violence and rapid rehousing. That will also help sort of move people out of emergency shelter more quickly. And so you'll probably see these numbers continue to increase over the years if the need remains consistent.
Katie?
Yes, yeah, thank you for the presentation. So I had 2 questions. The first one is, could you describe a little bit more about the rapid rehousing and what the format is?
Sure. So rapid rehousing is rental assistance, short-term rental assistance, like in the form of subsidies. So the tenant or client provides a portion of their income towards their rent, and then the nonprofit provides the rest. They have supportive services, case management services that meet people in their unit after the unit is found, of course, and help people move in to housing. But the kind of the first step really is engaging people around looking for an apartment in the community that they'll be able to afford in the long term. So some of it is projecting out like what they think that their income will be down the line, if they'd be eligible for other housing assistance, but helping them move into and secure that apartment, get on their own lease, and then provide the services to them in that home.
Great.
Does that help?
Awesome.
Does that answer what you were?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. My other question is, how do you think that with the new federal administration, how is that going to affect things? in terms of funding, or do you, I mean, you might not know, but.
I don't know. I will say that the HUD's annual competition was just locked into a 2-year competition. So that secures at least the next year's of funding. State helps add some stability to that. But I don't think I can project anything beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I believe HUD was one of the departments that the prior Trump administration proposed getting rid of. So if that's an indication of what they may try to do with funding, we'll see. I did want to jump in with at least one of my questions, and then I'll go to you, Jason. So when you listed the number or the different types of shelters, I didn't see anything specifically around unaccompanied or runaway youth. What shelter exists for those youth?
Heather, you want to take that one?
None specifically. We work very closely with our community partners to be able to address that. If there is any youth that, especially if they're being kicked out of their home or they're no longer able to stay where they are safely and they're in school, the school social worker usually reaches out to us and we try to place that person somewhere safely. We do not put them in general populations in the shelters. We put them somewhere separate so that because they do not do well in what we call general population with the other folks. We try to keep them separate. We also try to work with, if the person is under the age of 18, we work with Child and Family Services to see if we can get any kind of help with the family, to see if we could have any negotiations, try to mitigate whatever the circumstances is that let that person lose their housing. We also try to bridge them to some sort of housing if they're able to. Whatever they need. We do not make any decisions in isolations for this young person. We try to work collaboratively with a lot of various agencies that could support the youth once they're in the community.
How big is that population? Go ahead, Nicole.
No, I was just going to add, as part of the non-congregate overflow opportunity that's in the RFP that's posted, this population is called out there as well, tied within our family services. So we can be a bit more creative in terms of whether it's hotels or partners with our housing providers and these master lease opportunities that we can create non-congregate safe haven and apartment style supports moving forward.
Okay. Do you guys have the numbers on? Because I know you talked about the number of adults that you were helping, the number of families. Do you have the numbers for the unaccompanied youth that are helped each year or in a given year?
From my experience, since I've started almost 5 years ago, we haven't seen any unaccompanied minors in Arlington.
Okay.
But I'll say that from my perspective, it's limited to when folks are hitting emergency shelter. And so to Heather's point, we're preventing that from happening. So my sort of working understanding is a small number, if any, are really kind of hitting that place with absolutely nowhere to go, especially under 18.
Heather, do you have a sense of what population experiences homelessness under the age of 18 in Arlington that may not end up in emergency shelter, but still the county ends up working with them?
Yeah, and just to know that once they're under 18, Child and Family Services Division has to get involved. We cannot work with anybody under the age of 18 independently. Mm-hmm. But once they're still in high school, we will work with them, right? And they're over the age of 18. But Child and Family Services comes to the table once we see anybody under the age of 18, and they would either work with the families or they would try to figure out what's best for them, put them in foster homes. We have several group homes where either we use some in Falls Church as well. If the ones in Arlington are full, we try our best to be able to house them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I did have one other question before I go back to other questions. One of the things that had sort of prompted me, inviting you all to come here was learning about the waits to get into emergency shelter, which kind of surprised me because I didn't know that was a thing in Arlington. I just kind of assumed that, you know, if you needed an emergency bed, that it was available for you. And I think at the time, you had said that, you know, at least previously we had waits up to 6 months. And I think that was down to, you know, maybe a couple months or something. Can you talk about what that, for folks who, you know, makes sense for them to go into emergency shelter, that's what they want to do, what do those wait times look like, and what have they looked like over the last, you know, couple of years?
Okay, I'll start with Trini. I'll get that. So I will start with families right now because I just did the numbers today. Family shelters, as Trina mentioned earlier, we went down to one family shelter this year, right? So we only have Bridges to Independence. One of the things that is happening is that we're colliding with eviction for some of the families, is that we have a wait list. Families, because in Arlington, we have a little known fact in Arlington that you cannot be in your car and sleep with children in Arlington. You can in other surrounding jurisdictions, but you cannot in Arlington. So folks are not allowed to do that. So if somebody is identified in their car, we are notified. And we do not have families in areas that are not fit for human habitation because of the children. So we do have families in hotel waiting to either be rapidly rehoused from hotel, or they're waiting to get into Bridges to Independence shelter. Right now, currently, as of today, we have 22 families in hotel. Our longest family right now has stayed around 4 to 5 months to get into family shelter, right? So that's the families, right? And they enter hotel for various reasons, whether it's eviction, whether it's separation of a family, whatever it is, we deal with the families separately. Singles, on the other hand, are very different. Singles enter shelter once there's room, right? We have two shelters. We have RPC and we have the HSC. The shelters, believe it or not, a lot of times are full. And if they are full, because we are the entry point from criminal justice systems, from the hospitals, from nonprofits, the community, right? We get referrals from everywhere for shelters. So that's why it remains pretty much full. And so if we get a list, if somebody calls and they're not an Arlington resident, we give them up to 96 hours, 4 days in the shelter, so that we can figure out how to get them back to their jurisdiction, or how to best help them for next steps. And we have the ability to do that. So we allow them to stay up to those 4 days. Folks that once the shelter is full, we keep them on a spreadsheet, and we say, hey, this is when the person called, this is what's going on with them. We do exactly what the slide said. We try diversion. Hey, is there somebody you can go to? You will not lose your Arlington residency status if we place you there and you're safe, right? Because one of the main things is that you're somewhere safe. So we try diversion. We see where can they be safe, who can they be with, and we try our best to be able to help them. A lot of them couch surf, right, during this time. And once they're couch surfing, we try to say, hey, we check in on them. If the bed comes available, we call them, we say, hey, do you still want this bed? It's available. You can come in. A lot of them during that time have found a place that they can safely stay in the interim until they get back on their feet. But we do check in with folks on a daily basis once their space becomes available. We try our best to reach out to the single individuals and say, hey, there's a bed available. But as you guys know, right now is hypo season from November 1st to March 30th. So we don't have that as much, because once somebody tries to enter shelter, we have the beds available. You could come in. Because of the weather outside, we try to keep them inside and off of the street as best as we can. Both of our shelters are low barrier shelters, so you don't have to be dry, quote unquote, to enter the shelter. So we try our best to work with folks. We do have, because Arlington is so small, and we do have some sex offenders, we have to, and we try not to keep our sex offenders on the streets. We do have space at the residential program center to house up to 4 sex offenders at this time. We cannot house them at the HSC because there is a school right across the street underneath less than 50 feet from the building. So we can no longer keep sex offenders there. So we have to place them over at RPC. So we try our best to keep folks that are in certain situations off the streets as best as we can, and at least know where they are. As Trina says, we work collaboratively with the HSC outreach team, and they will normally inform us. So like if we say, hey, we're trying to find this person, and they'll say, oh yeah, we saw them here, let's try to get them in. So we try our best to work with the resources that we have to be able to house folks.
And my apologies to the other commissioners. I have one follow-up question that I want to do before I go to the next person. So one of the things that, when we were talking about like how do we address sort of the gaps in the need for shelter? One of the things that you all stressed was like we need more CAFs. We need more affordable housing, permanent housing that we can get people into. And this may not be something that, there is a sort of magic number for, but like, is there a number of like, if we had this many more CAFs, then it would sort of eliminate the backlog of people who are trying to get housed. That if we had I don't know, like 200 more CAFs or something. I mean, we're bringing new CAFs online all the time, but yeah, I guess, like I said, you may not be able to answer this question, and there may not be a specific answer, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, as we're looking at the needs in the community and more affordable housing, like what additional number of CAF units would help like seriously address the challenges that you all are facing with like rapid rehousing and things like that?
I was like, who wants to try this one? I mean, so I worked in a community that tried to do that sophisticated projection to figure out what the gap is, and it is challenging, right? Because you have to calculate a lot of different moving factors, your performance as a system, as a community, how many people are need year to year. And so it's very challenging to get to that kind of a number. So I can't offer one up today. I don't know if Nicole and Heather would want to venture a guess, because it's also the accessibility of the CAF, but it's also the rental assistance and the flexibility of financial assistance to help people access that. What rapid rehousing allows us to do is help people that have zero income get out of emergency shelter quickly and into permanent housing. And it takes quite a bit of work to do that. Sometimes we leverage the ALP, the Arlington Landlord Partnership, to reduce screening criteria. It's landlords willing to sort of jump in and support someone who on paper may not have the best record, doesn't have income, but with assistance, right? We believe and we have faith, right, that people are going to do well once they're in housing. So it's the housing stock, but I have to put a plug in for that flexible rental assistance as well as a huge need. We had an influx of that during the pandemic from the COVID relief. That has dried up. So now we're trying to tap into other resources that at the state and federal levels are very flat year over year. So that's also a need that we have. I don't know if Heather and Nicole would want to add.
No, it's supply, it's flexible rental supports. And I think we also have to sing in the same tune of the screening criteria, because even if you give me 200 CAFs, right, doesn't mean that I can, even with some supports, can get folks in the door if they have barriers, right? Whether it's a prior rental history, whether it's poor credit or what have you. So while we do have the ALP with a number of our big housing providers in the county, it is still a day-to-day sort of struggle conversation to ask for those secondary screenings and waves of conditions that might be outdated to give them a second look for lease up. So I think it's a big three.
Thank you. And I think, to me, this is kind of the important advocacy question, because as we're going to be talking to the county board about what we think they should do to be successful in actually completing the strategic plan that you guys have in place, right, to functionally end homelessness by 2026, it seems like we have to make those investments, otherwise we can't do that, and that it won't happen. So having, I know it's complicated formula or something, but having that information so that we can go to the board and say, we need 300 more units, we need this much more in rental assistance, and we need this many units that are low barrier to make this work. Otherwise, if we're just like, yeah, we just need some number of additional units and we need, just more money for, I think that would help if the county is able to produce that. It would help us sort of focus that ask, instead of just like provide resources to support the implementation of the strategic plan, which is really important, but we don't have those specific like asks to say, and this is what that really entails. Like, here's what you have to do. Otherwise, we won't be successful in meeting these goals.
But not only the amount, Kellen, but is it really affordable, right? And that is, we could get 5,000. It doesn't matter, because is it really affordable, right? We can move people in, but can they stay in there? Because it's really not, because after the subsidies are dried up, or after the subsidy, it's just not enough. Even with the subsidies, we are still seeing people on housing rents that still come in for assistance. People, so is the subsidy enough? I mean, is the rents affordable? And that's the issue. One bedroom is what, 16, 7? That's not affordable. So let's talk about affordability.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to Jason.
Yeah, thank you. Really great information. This actually conversation has sparked some things. So talking about rapid rehousing, I'm looking at indicator 36 in the affordable housing indicators, and it's definitely showing a large increase. From like mid 150s, 140, like 139 in 2019, and now like FY 2024 highest it's ever been, 370. But like, yeah, so with these households, going through rapid rehousing, is there just, I guess part one of the question is, I guess you're definitely, are you getting from the partners seeing that it's a lot harder now to rapidly rehouse this larger number of people versus back in like 2018, 2019? And then in terms of the ability to go to certain rehousing, is there, I guess, would there be a great need in space for like maybe a lot of smaller units, perhaps with like a shared kitchen or things of that nature? Would be like, if there were a lot of those, like for like, I guess, single households that could utilize that, or maybe family households where they can have like 2 of those small units to share a kitchen or things of that nature. Could that be kind of possible, like down the line, thinking of pipeline? And then with the rapid rehousing, is it, I guess, a lot of times like if they have faced a lot of barriers for screening, is that like a landlord just choosing, well, why, if I've got a demand for an apartment, like why would I go? Is that the issue of like they're not going to that household that maybe has a lot of barriers versus one that doesn't, but still also needs that housing? Is that kind of like another barrier? Sorry, a lot of questions, but just, I don't know.
I think I was trying to not note them down, but if I don't get to one, just say it again, please. So I would say rapid rehousing, I think it's more difficult, not so much because of the number of people that are being served. I think the number of people increasing was a reflection of the resources that we've had made available, and why our rapid rehousing numbers increased. What's getting, I think, more difficult is that I feel like using the post-pandemic excuse is like, how far out can we do that? But the reality is that the incomes are not keeping pace across the people experiencing or formerly experiencing homelessness, right? So where there's improvements in the economy overall, we're not feeling that so much. And so subsidies are getting stretched longer and deeper because of the challenge that people are having being able to manage their rent on their own. So I think that makes it more difficult. Nicole, did you want to add some?
I was going to add to the rapid rehousing. One of the things that we've had advocated with HUD is also the index for the fair market rents are not really aligned with the affordability that we have in Arlington, right? In the county, we're resource rich, it's expensive. The 1650 is like for an efficiency, but that FMRs, fair market rents, are way lower than what the market is going for. So in terms of having the subsidies, yes, but how far it can even stretch to that 24 months is nearly impossible if the dollar amount in the grants that we're getting isn't enough to cover anyone to 13 months or 14 months of that 24.
And Nicole, is that true for the small area fair market rent as well?
So this is where HUD should talk to each other, right? So you have their federal housing choice voucher program that force like jurisdictions such as ours in metropolitan statistical areas to look at small area fair market rents. But then they have other programs that were operating in the same area and they set another index which is not aligned. So where housing choice voucher can reach and pay a much deeper subsidy as obviously continuous, it's not happening in some of the COC related funding streams that we have, federal and at the state level.
I think the other question too was like sort of these shared housing opportunities, if that's a need. If we have been trying to promote more and more this idea of like roommate situations as a strategy to improve affordability, particularly for our single adults. I think it's more realistic. But it's a culture shift too, and it's an expectation shift that I think a lot of communities are struggling with. But we've recently had some wins where a couple households have come together, single adult households have come together and are renting units together. It takes a lot of coordination, it takes a lot of work, but our resources are flexible and allows us to do that. So it could be an option. The shared housing could also be where there's like a communal kitchen and you coming together. Also is a cost saving maybe for permanent supportive housing, so staff can be on site and multiple clients can be kind of under one roof. So that's also been brought up in conversations and circles in the strategic planning. And then I wrote screening barriers is another question, but I don't think I caught the last question that you had, Jason.
No, I think that, well, thank you. This is really, I think these questions really, really good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Zach had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
I could put my hand down if we need to keep on schedule. This is not so important that I delay everything.
I think this is super important, like this topic. And as long as Nicole, Trina, and Heather, you guys are, and I apologize for the people coming after this, but I've really been wanting you guys to come and talk about this for a couple months, and I'm so glad you're here. So if you guys are okay answering a few more questions, then I'd like to have a chance to let the commissioners, ask the questions.
If it's okay with Trina and Dr. Venner, I know we did have a hard stop and we've surpassed that, but maybe for the other commissioners that have had their hands up that have been waiting to jump in, if we could take those two.
Well, I think, Jason, did you have another question? Or is your hand just still up from before?
Oh, sorry, I lowered it. Sorry.
Okay. Zach, you can go ahead with your question then.
All right, this is a really quick follow-up on Heather's answer to Callan's first question about wait times. What does our approach look like with regard to regionalism in the area? Is there a system where we're tracking which beds are available in other jurisdictions and we're communicating? I know that happens in some metropolitan areas, with hospitals. Okay, you have a bed in this county. This county has no beds, and they're communicating. Do we do that, or is that not a thing?
It's not a thing.
There's interest.
People try to. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Heather. You go first.
What happens is that Arlington County, for lack of a better word right now, we're resource rich. And people look to us a lot. And, if Virginia Hospital Center, just today, we had a person that is from Prince William in the hospital, cannot return back to Prince William. So they were trying to get him into the homeless center there. And they don't have the room. And they didn't know what to do. And they wanted to put him in our shelter for the 4 days, for the 96 hours. Can he get out and get into the 96 hours? And I said, but you didn't try all of the homeless shelters in Prince William. And I said, let's try the day program. We called and they said, okay, send him to the day program. He could go to hypo, but they didn't know the flow. So yeah, we do have conversation based upon need. And if somebody is from another jurisdiction and we call, we don't just send somebody back. So if somebody says, hey, there's room in Loudoun County or there's room in Tennessee, I can go back there or I can go there. We always call to make sure there is some sort of support system or person willing to receive them. We don't just send somebody somewhere that there is no supports. Okay.
Thank
I was
you.
just
And
gonna-
then,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, Trina.
Sorry, Kellen. No, I was just gonna say the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the COCs from the 8, 9 jurisdictions in the DC metro area are having conversations to improve coordination. And I would say, it happens day to day, like Heather was explaining, and even our shelter providers. And then now the COC coordinators, people like in my role, also have points of contact too, so we can do some coordination when there needs to be some of that cross-jurisdictional partnerships, but there isn't sort of like a bed roster for the whole region.
Thank
I'll
you.
have it.
Alice, last quick question.
Hi there. First of all, I just want to thank all of you staff for this amazing service, this amazing work you do for our most vulnerable in Arlington. And I'm just really proud of the work that we do as a community to reach out to our folks who are really struggling. So that's first and foremost. And then I just wanted to follow up on a couple things that I heard. When in the past, I know we've had more, kind of low level or inexpensive hotels that are quickly disappearing, like the Highlander, Red Lion, all these. I'm wondering what you have left in that kind of a product. And maybe it goes to what I was going to ask, and Jason started was like, we haven't had an SRO. Is that really what we need? Is something that's more permanent, like you said, for single or double rooms? So that was kind of like a two-parter. And then the only other thing, when you were asking Kellen for numbers, I'm like, if we need to be advocating for CAFs, clearly they need to be 0 to 30% units, right? Like the cheaper they are, the more, the further that housing grant or something will go, right? So if anything, we would ask for the least expensive to be, get as many of those as we could, whether it be, 50 more or something like that, to try to really cut down on, or, house people and get cut down in the shelter. So that was just a couple things I wondered if you had any thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. I could answer the first two. The hotels. We currently have 3 hotels that we use. Because it's families, a lot of times we try to get somewhere that they can warm food or cook food or something, right? Because we don't really have hotels that with kitchens that would take a lot of our families. So we do have that. We also try to have hotels where we can have easy access to them, whether it's the garden style hotels or something that we can have access to them quickly and they can have access to get services more easily. So we primarily use 3 hotels. We use the Boat Days Inn and then we use the Comfort Inn. Just because, one, they'll take our clients and they work really well with us, that anything they know to reach back out to us. We used to work very closely with 2 other hotels and they have stopped working with us because of certain incidents with our families, because we don't have on-site case management. And that was something that a lot of our clients, going through all of this trauma of either being evicted or losing their housing or whatever it is, and being in a strange hotel, it's not easy. So a lot of times there was incidents that we did not address immediately because we don't have staff on site and they did not partner with us. But these other hotels still partner with us, and they partnered with us during COVID very well. And they have continued that because they know that we will continue to work with them.
And then was there anything on the SRO part or the CAFs?
In terms of if that is more that's needed, I would say yes, because let me tell you, right now, we need all the help we can get, right? Because we're going to continue to see a rise in some of these cases. So if SROs, and I think they could only be helpful, because one of the things that we don't look at is sometimes when these families are torn apart, whether they're separated for whatever reason, sometimes they just need that support, whether it be for a time until they get reunited or whatever. But I think we do need some sort of housing that we can address some of these needs immediately versus later.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentation and answering all of our questions. Like I think multiple people have said, this work is so incredibly important and critical to serving those most in need in our community and getting them back into permanent housing. So thank you and your colleagues for all the great work that you do. We will definitely try to figure out how we can best support those efforts with policymakers and talk to the board to make sure that we have the resources to actually meet the goals that we're setting for our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, next item on our agenda, and apologies for this being later than was originally set on the agenda, is the Green Building Incentive Program.
Yes, so now I'll pass it over to Demetra and Victoria.
Okay, and Victoria, has Paul joined us?
Yes, I think
Yes,
Paul
I-
is here.
Great,
I'm here,
wonderful.
Demetra. I will share my screen. Here we go. Great. Well, I hope everyone can see that. And hi, good evening, everyone. It's great to meet you all here virtually. My name is Paul Roman, and I'm the Green Building Program Manager for Arlington County. I'm part of Arlington's initiative to Rethink Energy Team, or AIR for short, in the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management. Tonight, I'm joined by my colleague, Vicki Kieschel from Cadmus. Vicki is an architect and consultant for the county's Green Building Program. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Demetra McBride, who is OSM's Bureau Chief. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all regarding the incentive program update. We look forward to hearing your feedback and answering any questions at the end of the presentation. So here's tonight's agenda. I acknowledge that we only have 20 minutes here for this briefing, so we'll try and be swift and efficient as we can. But I'll hand it off to Vicki to start with item 1, and then I'll pick up on item 2, where I'll provide a high-level overview of the Green Building Incentive Policy proposal. And then at the end, as mentioned before, we'll take any questions or feedback with the remaining time left. So with that, Vicki, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thanks, Paul. And before Paul gets to the meat of the update for the GBIP, let's talk about benefits of greenhousing. Next slide, Paul, please. Well, there are lots of benefits for health. Certainly, most of the green building rating systems that we're using feature improved indoor air and environmental quality. That's a credit that you can earn through them. The avoidance of toxic red list materials is another feature of these green building rating systems. Sound attenuation, particularly valuable in Arlington along our automotive corridors, that's also a feature of one rating system that we're now featuring as a unique pathway in the upcoming GBIP, which is PHIUS, or Passive House International US. Biophilic design, there's an example right here visually. And then, of course, clean transit and walkability is also a feature of what's typically identified as green housing, green planning, and green housing. Next slide, please, Paul.
Hey, Vicki, if I can just interject a couple, because I know that there was a lot of interest here. In advance, we were advised, I believe, by Kate, that the commission was interested in knowing about benefits of green building. And I just wanted to note that when we talk about, for example, improved indoor air quality and environmental quality, that isn't just a kind of general or amorphous state of mind. I know that I personally did a project in California. It goes back to 2011. And we measured the before and after improved indoor air quality on 4 common pollutants, indoor pollutants, before and after green building upgrades. And coming out of that was a lot of data that we were able to translate into human health metrics. So when you talk about improved air quality, it has real tangible human impacts that get measured typically an analysis by avoided work days you missed, avoided school days missed, excess emergency room visits, extended emergency room visits, higher mortality rates when people live for long periods of time in poor indoor air environments. So just to let you know that these are things that are actually measured and have had studies done by them. So if there's any real interest in having detail on that, we're happy to provide that for you. Sorry, Vicky, go ahead.
No, not at all. And thanks, Demetra. No, it's important. And there are lots of studies on places with large asthmatic populations that actually have buildings, particularly affordable housing that's constructed to some of these standards. And the indoor environmental quality is really measurable and has improved the health of people that otherwise would be exposed to particulate matter in the atmosphere. So wonderful benefits there. Let's go on to the next slide, please, Paul. Certainly for energy efficient housing, you have this question of energy poverty, which people that are lower income certainly experience. Reduced energy costs are very important for them. It helps with energy insecurity. Passive design, this is a feature of the passive house way of building. It's a tightly insulated envelope, walls, roof, floor. That is something that is resilient because it not only is tight, that's a kind of building that improves indoor ventilation. There's less mold and moisture, better insulation, but it also remains stable if the power goes out. So the indoor environment will actually, help with power outages, which are a feature of life, alas, where we are. And of course, lower carbon emissions for the county. What you're seeing here in the bar charts, this is from a study of affordable passive house buildings in Philadelphia, which is in our climate zone. And it shows you the literal measure of energy use intensity, what code is in blue, what a LEED building is in purple or LEED buildings, and then the passive house buildings are in green. Quite a remarkable reduction in energy use. Onward, Paul. Next slide, please. And then there's sustainability and affordability. Typically, there's a higher first cost premium for building green, but now it's becoming more and more minimal, that higher first cost, that premium. The ongoing benefits are considerable, lower utility costs, lower maintenance costs. Anyone who's a building manager who is now working exclusively with LED lighting realizes that you don't have to change those bulbs, except maybe once a year, if that. The ability to leverage market incentives certainly is important, and we think those will remain even into the next administration, so current and future ones. And then importantly, and the last thing I'll mention is that we're planning a 6-month educational rollout of before the new GBIP goes live. We'll target integrated project teams, meaning everyone from the developer to their contractors and subcontractors, and also open these to the public on various topics, because we have a lot of new pathways, as Paul is about to explain, including an existing buildings pathway now, and also adaptive reuse for office to housing conversions. So with that, Paul, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Vicky. So now we'll look at the Green Building Incentive Program updates, the proposal, and the reasoning behind it. So the way we approached this proposal model is different compared to prior iterations of the program. Initially, we heard feedback from developers within the county and then we completed a benchmarking review of the current 2020 incentive program. In summary, through that benchmarking review, we came to the conclusion that bonus density is becoming uncompelling to developers. Aside from the green building program, developers can pursue additional density through other means in the county, such as financial contribution to affordable housing. We also concluded that nearly half of the site plans from 2020 till now were grandfathered into the prior 2014 program. So if you remember from the December 2020 board hearing, the county board allowed for a 3-month grandfathering period for site plan projects accepted by the county manager before March 31st of that following year, so 2021, but for those projects to opt into the 2014 incentive program. And then in Q1 of this year and up until now, we've undergone an extensive public engagement period, which included briefings for committees and commissions, NIOP, further developer conversations, the long-range planning committee, 2 industry workshops, and more. But as I turn to the next slide soon, which shows the summary table, you will see the extensive changes that we're proposing for this update, or upgrade, I should say. But based on what we're proposing, this model is seen as more of an upgrade or reinvention of the program rather than just an update based on prior iterations. So first, the remodeling of the program helps advance and support multiple objectives and purposes within the county. So throughout its history, the GBIP has provided an incentive for modeled energy savings. But in this proposal, we're taking the approach of proposing financial incentives for certified actual savings, or also known as performance-based savings. We're also proposing for the first time to expand the program to include additional construction pathways for existing buildings and adaptive reuse, and we're proposing to financially incentivize them both. As part of the background of that, we're proposing this because through an analysis of the county's GHG inventory, over half of the emissions inventory is produced from the building sector, so making this the largest source of emissions in the county. And then within this sector, the existing properties are a key factor as they have the potential to be energy inefficient and large carbon emitters. So the expansion of the program to include these new pathways also cross-cuts and supports the county's commercial market resiliency initiative, also known as CMRI 2.0, which targets the revitalization of vacant commercial properties and in return has the potential to create economic stimulus. And then also as part of this new model, because we're proposing new, or I should say new in quotes, but stringent standards, as well as new requirements, incentives, and more, we're proposing to include the educational and training sessions, as Vicky mentioned prior, for the marketplace. We acknowledge that developers, building owners, contractors, subcontractors, and those alike may not be as familiar with new standards and requirements that we're proposing. So creating sessions and curriculum for those to attend can potentially alleviate some of the apprehension in pursuing something new. And then as I just mentioned before, we're proposing 2 new pathways for existing buildings and adaptive reuse, but we're also proposing a new option or pathway for new design and construction called the climate adaptation pathway, just as Vicky mentioned briefly before too. So we'll continue to keep the traditional pathway that uses bonus density to incentivize private site plan developments. But in the climate adaptation pathway, developers will be financially incentivized if they meet the stringent energy performance standards through certification, through the certification Passive House US 0 certification, or FIUS for short. But if you're not familiar with Passive House, it is known as one of today's highest energy efficiency standards and completed through using passive design and construction measures. And it uses actual performance verification rather than modeling compared to a standard like LEED. And then lastly, the program model is designed to be flexible and fiscally responsible by tiering the financial incentives, which you'll see in the next slide. It creates a better managing mechanism for the county, whether that be capping the number of applicants through a grant structure or creating limited terms per fiscal year. And by creating a flexible program, it also gives the county board the option for pathways to be rolled out sequentially or bundled rather than all simultaneously. So what you're seeing here is the summary table of the proposal. I know this may get kind of visually confusing, but just we wanted to provide this in case anyone is interested in the detail of the model. And I could share this afterwards too. I think Alex is going to send out this slide deck. But at a high level, you're seeing the breakdown of the 3 types of construction and then the designated pathway or pathways for each of what's required, and then the incentive and duration proposed. But for discussion purposes tonight, we'll focus on the reasoning on the far right column. So starting for new construction, the traditional pathway continues to build on and advance the carbon reduction goals for the 2020 Green Building Incentive Program, and it provides market familiarity. The climate adaptation pathway uses proven energy performance rather than predicted modeling, and it also targets county climate vulnerabilities through carbon reduction, indoor environmental quality, and other areas included in the green infrastructure requirements. For existing buildings, as I mentioned before, the existing building stock is a key factor in the GHG emissions percentage for the building sector, and expanding the program to include this focuses on impactful carbon reduction and improved energy efficiency. And then lastly, adaptive reuse, similar to existing buildings, but taking an existing commercial property and converting it to housing, which can also potentially lower carbon reduction in continuing operations and saves carbon from building reuse. These are the GBIP incentives compared. Just to summarize, the traditional pathway through LEED will continue to use bonus density. The climate adaptation pathway through FIAS will also include bonus density, but the main incentive is a financial incentive. And then for existing buildings and adaptive reuse, they will also be financially incentivized, or what we're proposing that they be financially incentivized. Then here are the community benefits, many of which we touched upon already in this briefing, but just to reiterate a few. One, we're looking at this GBIP upgrade as a 5-year pilot. Again, this provides flexibility in the market, and it provides financial security for both the county and private development community. Two, we're incentivizing the use of verified performance savings through new standards such as FIAS and Energy Star, rather than predicted modeling like LEED. Three, we're taking into account our existing building stock. And then four, we're proposing the 6-month tolling period, which will include a dynamic education and engagement program for developers, building owners, architects, and more. And then lastly here, before we take any questions, what we're hearing from the community through this public engagement period. Starting at the top, from the advocates, we broke this down into 3 sections. But from the advocates, the main topics include building electrification mandates, an increase in electric vehicle charging infrastructure than what's already being proposed in this GBIP upgrade, jumping down from affordable housing developers and the conversations and feedback that we've been hearing from them. One is tax credits. Did the county look into tax credits as an incentive option to use in this upgrade? We did. That's another conversation we could get into the Q&A portion. We did look into tax credits initially before jumping into a tiered financial incentive structure, which is based on the rigidity of Virginia law and the stringency around it. Tax credits did not work in the proposal in terms of the tiered certifications and different systems and requirements that we're using. Financial incentives and operational costs. So aside from tax credits, offering the financial incentives that we're currently proposing in the GBIP upgrade, how do those play into the operational costs post-construction? For the climate adaptation pathway, we're offering nominal incentives up front for energy modeling and a feasibility study. But from affordable housing developers, they're asking based on the current rent market, because they can't raise rents above a certain cost, then they're asking, how do these financial incentives, can they play out longer than just getting the certification and then receiving that award at the end? There's also interest in new standards or certification standards that we're proposing, such as FIAS through the climate adaptation pathway. But again, there's some hesitancy around that because builders and contractors and some contractors just don't have the background or experience through those certifications yet. And then from the market rate housing developers, again, developers are forgoing additional density through the GBIP. We do see it waning within the current 2020 incentive program. There is a cost burden associated with higher levels of certification, such as FIAS, or what we're asking for in the proposed traditional pathway, going from LEED Gold to LEED Platinum. Loans in the market right now also have unfavorable interest rates, and they're higher for projects that may not be holding on to their properties for more than 5 years. Bonus density in the market right now, again, is undesirable because bonus density provides or should provide a longer investment timeline if owners are looking to sell their properties within the first 4 to 5 years after construction and operation. It's just not favorable right now in the market. Inexperience with certification standards, again, same thing as the affordable housing developers. There is interest in certifications like FIAS, but there's no background or knowledge from contractors or subcontractors. And that's why we're also proposing that 6-month education period too. And then lastly here, resistance to building electrification. There's many studies and conversations out there right now that the market just isn't ready for full electrification as a mandate, especially in a voluntary program. But studies have shown, and especially within Arlington and the feedback that we were hearing, building electrification does require enhanced technology and utility solutions from our utility companies such as Dominion. And then that is it for our presentation. I know that was a lot probably to take in within 20 minutes here, but kind of giving you a high level overview of what we're proposing. We're happy to go back to any of the slides, look at the model in more detail. But any questions or comments or feedback that you may have, we're happy to answer too.
Thank you for the presentation. It was a lot, and I know especially for me, this is not my typical focus area. So there's a lot that you talked about that I don't really understand, but I'm gonna open it up for questions from commissioners. I know Brian Coleman said that he has a question.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you so much, staff, for just all your work on this really important project. I had a question about the cash incentive structure that you were talking about earlier. And it seems really interesting. And I think once we see the initial uptake by developers, that will provide feedback on how well they'll work with that for the climate adaptive pathway for the new and some existing buildings. But I since to the best of my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have dedicated funding sources that have been identified for the program. And so this could already strain our budget and perhaps limit how many may be willing to participate. Is it possible to couple the cash incentives with like expedited permitting or offer additional technical assistance to access federal or state grants to make this appealing, at least in the short term?
Yeah, it's a really interesting comment, and we have talked about this question of other incentives. There are a couple of upfront incentives that are baked in, particularly the climate adaptation pathway, which is that they would get a small grant to actually investigate the feasibility of doing this new system of building FIAS. And then they would get money to model the building in FIAS because air tightness is a big deal in that. The question, though, of dedicated funding is something that is interesting, and that's where is it something where we set an annual limit and it's like first come first served? I mean, we're in talks now with decision makers about that. It is the question with the old method that's still incentives method that still goes for the traditional pathway. You give bonus density. You don't spend that money. The county doesn't spend that money. That has had, so we are talking about different incentive model totally that would require financial output. And so we'll see when it's tested. Yes, as you say, will there be market uptake? We don't know. Maybe developers in the short term will all still do the traditional pathway with its various levels of bonus density. We don't know. We ask the developers we meet with, and we've met with quite a few of them, are these incentives speaking to you? Do you like it? Is this something that is worthwhile? And we also base the incentive model, particularly for the climate adaptation pathway, on a tried and tested incentive model coming out of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where it is now a state Commonwealth, they're a Commonwealth too, requirement that multifamily housing do FIAS. They have adopted that. They're convinced. And New York looks like it's kind of going that way in some areas, at least in New York City. And it is a method coming south, and it is already on our doorstep in Washington, D.C. and Anacostia, where Berry Farm is being built to FIAS standards. Now, that doesn't, the question of, will developers here do it? Will they do it in Arlington County? Will the county have enough money to fund this? I don't know.
I think the other thing, if I can just jump in for a moment, Victoria, it's Demetra, is that we're also looking at, when we sat down to really look at what an update would look like, and then looked at the performance of the prior iteration of the program, and really started seeing signs that, as Paul and Vicki had said, the bonus incentive was no longer an attractive or compelling incentive. To the extent that it was when, in the first couple of iterations of the program starting in 2000. But at the same time, we were also looking at commercial building inventory and the CMRI 2.0. And so for the past 18 months almost, we've been working very closely and tracking the two programs together, CMRI 2.0 and the Green Building Incentive Program. We were looking at, are there ways that we can use a remodeled program in order to incentivize more affordable housing, investment in affordable housing? So we're really looking on this, and you're absolutely right. It's a new notion. It is a new investment by the county, and it's probably going to be adopted on what you might see as like a grant program initially, 4 or 5 years, and really to test the uptake in it and to test what works about the model and what doesn't. But we're looking to the co-benefits of that type of investment, which are not insignificant, which is a potential stimulus in affordable housing. Also a kind of renaissance or a means by which you can accelerate the renaissance of failing commercial buildings. Those buildings, as you know, when they fail, when their vacancy rate goes up quite significantly, the commercial area around them starts to fail and decline as well. So we're looking at, and we won't be able to really tell or project with any level of accuracy what the financial benefits are to the county until we test drive the program. But we are confident that there are other financial benefits that come through other means.
I have a clarifying question, and then I'll go to Joe and Jason. Can you help me understand sort of what triggers this? So I think I sort of understand in the site plan context, this could be one of the negotiated benefits to the community. And correct me if that's an incorrect understanding of this. But there were other categories that were listed. How does this apply? How does this get triggered if we're not talking about a site plan project?
I'm going to defer to Vicki and Paul's greater expertise on that.
So, a lot of the projects that have gone through the site plan process in Arlington have gone through the Green Building Incentive Program. And the ones that haven't or don't want to do that, it's like everything seems to be a negotiation around these standards. And so you find that the go-to has been leadership in energy and environmental design for the last 2 decades in Arlington. So you find that projects that don't go through the incentive program actually have lead conditions in their site plan conditions. So it usually gets negotiated in some way. If that answers that question.
So, so this is
yeah.
separate from the site plan process. So this is something that developers or building owners could go through this program without having to go through the site plan process, and without having to do that negotiation.
No, they all go through the site plan process.
Okay.
They all must, yeah. But this is a strictly voluntary program. That's what we're left with as a Dillon rule state, is that we can't, unlike home rule states, we can't say, you got to do this green building action and that one and this one and that certification. We can't do that. We have to entice, we have to offer incentives, we have to say everything is voluntary, which it is. But the negotiation phase can be quite interesting, and that's where the rubber meets the road, really.
And so if this is approved by the county board, then it's essentially trying to offer, instead of increased bonus density, which the current plan offers, it's other incentives to get developers to agree during that negotiation to adopt features or all aspects of one of the two approaches, the climate adoption one and then the traditional one. Is that a correct understanding?
For new construction, right. And then we're hoping to, there's this category of existing buildings where, the detail on that also is that, we're hoping to draw in building owners of possibly poor performing buildings that may never have upgraded their energy systems or never thought to do that. We're hoping that we can kind of offer these financial incentives to them to do that. And that's a big area for environmental improvement and carbon savings for sure, is our existing buildings. So for the first time, we're offering incentives for those owners.
Good, thank you. Joe, did you still have a question?
Yeah, go with Jason first. I'm still trying to educate myself, so maybe by the time it's hard to for me. Okay, thank you.
I know it's a lot.
Jason?
Yeah, sorry. Do you mind? I have a series of comments and questions. Could you mind if I just rapid fire them real quick if I just go through? So just comment. I really love the buildings in the presentation in Grand Concourse and in Seattle, the Solis, especially the Solis. I was looking at the rent for that. 1 bedroom is $18.50 in Capitol Hill, which is Seattle, quite amazing for a new construction building with a true 1 bedroom. But I did notice both those buildings have, the very tight envelope, there's no step backs. They just go straight up. And of course the Bronx building has no parking, and the Seattle building is also 0.5 miles away from the light rail. So, that would be like having thinking 0.5 miles away from, Clarendon Metro Station. You don't have any zoning that permits these sort of buildings. So I don't know how feasible, these would be. But then also looking at costs of FIAS buildings versus, the cost to do that, in the examples in the presentation, is that based on already buildings that were designed to be FIAS in the first place? Because I know, let's say you have a building that's all glass, multiple step backs, 2 parking spaces per unit. That's obviously going to be more expensive to seal up and everything versus a simple building, smaller windows, etc. And I think also thinking just curious about the cost there. And then touching on what Brian was mentioning about uptake. Why not? Would it be feasible just to go with a higher, FAR bonus? Why not just allow that maybe another 1 or 2 stories to make it really feasible? I mean, would that really increase market uptake? And then we wouldn't need to do the cash, incentives, because it seems like that the cash incentive is essentially the county is subsidizing, you know, less housing, but retaining like the current like envelope, which I think, you know, won't necessarily be good. But and then next question. Sorry, I'm just going through.
No,
almost
please.
sorry. I've got a lot. I just want to get this out.
Oh.
Looking at a brand new building, let's say you have side by side like a studio, like a 400 square foot studio, a LEED Gold building versus like a FIAS building. So the difference in like electric, would that save like a tenant? Like let's say the electric bill is like $60 for the LEED Gold building. Would that be like $30 if it's like 50% energy more efficient? Like, and you know, looking at the costs, like, you know, that could be based on market rents. You know, that's only like couple, maybe not trivial, but not like really substantive. Like I'm just concerned about the cost there. And like, you know, talking about obviously getting people into green buildings is great, but like if we're not building enough of them, people end up getting displaced into areas like, you know, they can't live in Arlington, so they go to like, let's say Alexandria or West End, areas with more cars, you know, older housing stock. You know, like I mean, talk about how Massachusetts, New York are mandating these sort of buildings, but the average housing stock in these in like Boston, New York is way older and like worse conditions. So it's like, you know, they may be getting more, but like they're still not, the average person's not able to access that sort of building because there's not enough of them. And then looking at adaptive reuse, could there be a potential where that if there's so much incentive to adaptive reuse, say like a 12-story building, if it's like, you know, block away from a metro station, you know, what if there was incentive enough to like say, okay, let's build a 30-story, you know, like the Bronx example, why don't we build a 26-story building, super tight envelope, no step backs, you know, that could that be a negative benefit if we're incentivizing retaining existing building when we can be building a much higher building, especially in the area? You know, Arlington per capita, you know, greenhouse gas emission use is lowest in areas in our urban areas. And then also EV, I was looking at, I think the parking requirements for a FIAS zero, I think it's what, 10% have to be EV, like ready to go with the setup, and then another 10% need to be FIAS needs to be like ready. But like a lot of buildings in Arlington are not really there yet with the market. So like if a building decides to do that, won't they have to upscale their units because they need to find the market to meet that, or else it's like that cost is just projected onto all the units. And especially if you're a renter with no car, you're now having to pay for this extra like thing that you don't have. So that really worries me on a cost perspective. So sorry, like a lot of different things, but like these are just some like really things I'm thinking about, and I'm like kind of concerned on some of these aspects. So sorry for a long wind, but a lot of things.
No, they're all great questions. You know, the one about the premiums, the cost premiums, we did talk to people that had built these buildings, and yeah, that the info comes from them. I mean, we talked to the architect of the Grand Concourse at Datner Architects in New York City, for example, and we talked to one of the primary FIAS consultants in our region about costs, and we talked to the FIAS folks directly as well. So that those are reflective of actually what is going on in the market. They also say that the more that you build, if you build more than one FIAS building with relatively the same team, the costs come way down because you know what you're doing. Yeah, the question about they don't have, you know, they tend to be more simple in form because they have to be tight buildings and well sealed. And so I think you do see a kind of simplicity of form. There are not a lot of setbacks. You know, about the height and kind of the, you know, the question of could you not just, rather than incentivize it with grant incentives or financial incentives, could you bring back the idea of increased FAR? We did have FIAS in the 2020 GBIP at a higher FAR level, and there was no market uptake. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about this for the future, because I think it is interesting. I'm sure that part of the reason there was no market uptake is that, you know, developers in our region, I mean, they're kind of scared of it. They're scared of not being able to build to this method, even though it's possible, entirely possible and desirable. But I think, maybe once they get the hang of it, if there's enough market uptake, then we do revert, see if they do want to do taller buildings. I mean, part of it though is also, I mean, there's some thought, I guess, locally, bonus density has resulted in tall buildings. And do we really want all this height? The added density tends to display itself in height. And I mean, that's been a question, I think, for a lot of Arlingtonians about that. I don't know if not having bonus density means maybe, you're not focused so much on height, it's lower buildings. I don't know, Paul, do you want to weigh in? I feel like I'm you may want to zero in on some of this too.
I'll add a point to that, Vicky, just about the additional FAR and putting in that requirement. Jason, I think, kind of going through our benchmarking review of the current 2020 program, the projects that have opted into the 2020 program, mostly all of them have been at the lower two FAR tiers. We've only had 2 projects that have gone past 0.35 FAR, and one of them was Amazon HQ2 at the 0.55 FAR level. So projects are committing to the lower FAR tiers, and I think it goes back to Vicky's comment, is that there's kind of comments or feedback or just stories in the marketplace, especially within Arlington, of building higher. And again, is bonus density persuasive, pursuing stringent standards through a green building program? I don't see LEED as being a stringent standard in today's marketplace, or as stringent as something as FIAS. There is still energy efficiency standards involved, and it's still a great certification system. But I think, when you're looking at the different avenues to achieve bonus density within Arlington, such as affordable housing or other approved measures by the county manager's office, compared to pursuing sustainability standards that developers may already be pursuing themselves within their portfolio or their own goals internally as a firm. And they may not need that bonus density on their site to begin with. So I think kind of just going through that process led us to looking at this proposed financial incentive for the additional pathways, including the existing buildings and adaptive reuse. Getting to your question, I think you had about adaptive reuse, and some projects or some developers may look at that and say, well, let's just build a new construction building. We understand that adaptive reuse is not a one-size-fits-all approach for every building. There's feasibility and logistics that goes into that, whether it's concerning window to wall ratio, whether it's concerning the existing systems within the building, how many units can you fit in there, what are your plans or use types, whether it's converting from commercial to residential, which is what we're proposing, but if that's also hotel use, or if it's a mixed use building with retail space at the bottom, whatever it may be. But there's this aspect in terms of green building and sustainability when you take into account of an existing building that you're converting. As we know, the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. So you're ultimately saving embodied carbon when comparing to building new. So we would hope, and again, we understand that's not a one-size-fits-all approach for developers or building owners that would pursue this, but we would hope that they would pursue, kind of feasibility and look into studies around that of an existing property, and then take into account, the environmental impact moving forward of building something new compared to using something existing. But again, there's factors involved, financial, physical, logistical, but creating an avenue and opening that up to developers. And we're hoping in the end pursuing that option if you're an existing building owner.
Thank you. And thank you, Jason, for the very thoughtful comments. I'll go to Katie, and then I have a much less intelligent question for you all.
Thanks. Well, I want to thank you, first of all, so much for coming and making this presentation. I think, and for all the work that you're doing on it, I think it's a really important initiative, especially as it's more and more urgent to improve our carbon emissions, as well as the health benefits. So I have a few comments and questions. I guess my first just preliminary question is, do you know when the county board is expected to vote on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now, we're going through conversations with other advocates and stakeholders within the county. Also, yeah, we kind of have two opposing sides for this proposal, and we're hoping within the next 1 to 2 months here within the new year that we'll be able to come to an agreement and have a draft of this board report ready for approval by hopefully March for the board to approve. But that's tentative right now, and that's what we're planning for.
Okay, that's good to know. I had heard that it might be this month, which is why I was like, we better hurry up and write a letter about it. But it's good to know that there might be a little bit more room. Yeah, so some comments. So I'm really excited about the FIAS new design. And especially how it's improving indoor air quality by not having gas stoves and gas appliances. And then also the existing buildings pathway, which is, I think, really important, as you mentioned, that some of those older buildings that are really inefficient could have this opportunity, especially of more affordable buildings, that where residents might be suffering these health impacts. I think I do share the same concern as Brian about the structure of the incentives being like mainly focused on cash payments, which, as you have noted, it will probably be restricted to a small number of projects because there would be limited funding from the county. And especially if we want to make this more sustainable long term, looking into those other incentives, I think, is really important. I know you all have already looked into tax credits, and you said that was not going to work. But in terms of the technical assistance to try to get other grants, as well as the expedited permitting, could you share, have you looked into those? Could you share a little bit more about those?
The technical assistance doesn't appeal to developers as much because they already have all their teams that do that for them. So that seems to be kind of for them, not great. The expedited permitting, that's an interesting one. We heard actually from, I guess I can't name names, a big developer, let's say, that the reason that they go, one of the primary reasons they go through the GBIP is because it is a quicker permitting process than the regular kind of site plan process. So that was interesting. So maybe the expedited permitting is something to really focus on, there. And I don't know, we've been talking again about, well, part of the reason that we didn't do tax abatement is that you couldn't, in Virginia, you would have to offer the same.
You'd have to offer the same exact tax reduction to every single, to the new construction, the same as the existing buildings, the same as, it doesn't allow you to tier it or customize it for the different building types.
Or for different building certifications.
Or for building certifications. Yeah. So it's just one size fits all straight across the entire spectrum. There are 3 jurisdictions within the Commonwealth that have been using tax incentives, some of them for, almost 2 decades, I think, or certainly more than a decade. And the uptake in those programs is really, really, really small. And it's probably for that reason.
But it is, I mean, it's still something to,
Hello.
maybe we're not being imaginative enough with thinking about what it could be. But yeah, I think this question also of parking minimums, do you kind of deal with that as an incentive, lift those parking minimums so the developers don't end up spending all that money on underground parking? But that's not something we can make a decision on. I know the county really requires certain parking minimums, but if wow, we'd welcome any input if somebody has a really terrific interesting idea for a new type of incentive that might work in our Dillon rural state. We'd love to hear it.
And the team, I just want to add, the team continues to look for other ways to leverage it with other programs. The county just recently updated its CPACE program. And for months now, we've been talking with the CPACE administrator, which is a national entity, a national administrator, about cross-leveraging CPACE with the GBIP. We've just heard in the past week that the lower courts in Virginia have... Sorry? Well, Montgomery County always gets raised to us, but I just want to point out that Montgomery County also has the ability under Maryland law to impose a public goods charge, and it does. So it has a public goods charge that's imposed on fuel and electric use, and it takes in $175 to $180 million each year. 10% off the top of that is dedicated towards their green bank. So they have that separate source of revenue, which is quite substantial, just under $200 million a year, for its climate and its energy programs to fund them, which we unfortunately do not have the ability to do in Virginia. But the other thing that we're doing is that the lower courts just determined that Governor Youngkin had exceeded his authority and abused the office by unilaterally removing the Commonwealth of Virginia from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So assuming that I'm sure he's going to appeal that to a higher court, but for the next year in office, maybe within a year, Virginia could find itself back in RGGI. And we would recommend that the board and other jurisdictions look at lobbying for a portion of that funding to go towards green building programs.
That's super helpful. Yeah, I appreciate your, openness to looking at other incentives. And, I realize this is probably really difficult. So that's great. I guess my last question was just, I know you said you've talked with developers about would this be attractive to them? But I guess, I think is really important that, that be studied enough that whatever is released actually would have uptake. Do you have any more comments on that?
Yeah, the discussions that we've gone through, there is interest from the development community. But again, regarding higher standards such as Passive House US, we're looking at conversions for adaptive reuse and the feasibility around that for our existing building stock within the county. I think there's just some hesitancy and some concerns, which rightfully so, they can express their feedback and be constructive as they want for this proposal. But I think there is interest. But again, it's just the knowledge and background and education around some of these requirements and standards that we're proposing. As I mentioned before, not to keep bringing up this example, but using Passive House as the example, FIAS is known as one of today's highest energy standards, and the design and construction process involved is more stringent compared to a certification like LEED. You're dealing with a performance-based certification, and although Passive House does have consultants and verifiers on those project teams throughout the whole process, and they're there to answer any questions. They have an open door policy, and they're happy to help. When you're dealing with contractors, subcontractors, it becomes a little tricky on projects if you're doing that for the first time, just based on the communication efforts involved. If things are VE'd out from design and then through construction, that becomes an issue for projects that are going through Passive House. So I think there's some of that hesitancy involved. And then also the financial aspect, as I mentioned before, the higher upfront costs for some of these certifications, even when you're dealing with LEED. If you're dealing going from LEED Gold to LEED Platinum, obviously there's going to be more cost involved there for your consultants, for the certification, for the credits involved, and the other things that you may be or may have to pursue through the county.
Thank you.
And we
Thanks,
do,
Joe.
just very quickly, that we do feel that the 6 months of a very intensive and wide spectrum education and outreach and training cohort really represents a very robust form of technical assistance as well.
I'm going to go to Joe and then Danny.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really have no background on this, so I got a bunch of questions and perception. I'll close with the perception that is probably the bigger issue. How long has the program been in existence? That's my first.
Since 1999.
Since,
Yeah.
okay. And currently, well, the perception problem is I've been in the federal housing for 50 years. And I mean, this was the first time in my life that we had a presidential election where housing and cost of housing was a top tier issue. Environment is a very emotional issue with some people or whatever. My question is how do we deal with the naysayers that say this is adding cost and stuff like that on development? That's basically it's the perception, and I'm sure the county is going to have this same issue. And finally, how much are we putting money up for this? Are we putting, as the county, the taxpayers putting money up here? Do we know what that is? And also, do we have a cost benefit analysis of the savings? You know, the whatever these cost incentives are and how much it's adding to the cost of housing and adding to the rents. That's it.
I probably wasn't very articulate before in saying that we're going to need to actually do projects to have actual verified analysis of the savings. But the savings, again, are going to be, particularly when you're talking about existing buildings or adaptive reuse. You're talking about buildings that are in a decline spiral, and they're taking the area around them into a decline spiral. So the investment in those buildings could first of all, that building is going to be generating more tax revenue post-construction. So it's going to return, at least a portion of the county's investment, if not recoup the investment over a certain number of, short number of years. Talking about raising the rents, we're looking at buildings that are going to be cheaper to operate and cheaper to maintain. So we would hope that the owners of those buildings, that would be a savings that would pass through in the form of slightly lower rents.
But the key word was hope. You said hope, but go on. Thank you.
Well, no. And that's why I said we do have to test model. We can model savings, but it's not the same as actually having verifiable projects where you can really start measuring hard outcomes.
There are a lot of studies that show increased asset value for buildings that are built to these standards. So that's another thing to just, keep an eye on. What's their, if you're looking at taking in property taxes from them, are they asset value is much higher? Is that a form of a payback basically for the county expending their money on this?
Danny?
Yeah, I was just curious if there was sort of a sweet spot in your analysis in terms of scale. Just thinking through, a lot of the conversation tonight on, what it takes to get these buildings certified, and larger scale buildings having a much larger cost to, get on board and get everything and into the system. Just makes that gap even larger at a much larger scale building. Seems like smaller projects might be easier to move the needle, and maybe if you have like a collection of smaller projects, then you get some sort of progress that way. I'm not sure if that's something that you've looked at, if there's like a sweet spot on scale that seems more doable for developers out there.
That's a great question too. These are all great questions. We've actually been told by developers that have done certifications like FIAS that it's more cost effective to do larger scale projects. That's really where you get you get a lot of the construction cost of doing them. I guess it's all in the knowing how, but it's substantially less than the smaller buildings. But I agree. I mean, it may be that in terms of scale, people want to start out small. Yeah, I don't know what will happen in terms of what the first FIAS building in Arlington County will be, what scale it will be. The ones in the District of Columbia that are the one that just came online this last week or so, that's fairly small building. I mean, it's 100 units. I mean, that's what I'm calling small or so. And I think it's a mid-rise building. So it's not, yeah, that may be the sort of comfort zone locally for now.
What building is that in DC that is?
It's in the Berry Farm development. I can't now remember the name. They all have these names. I'll look it up though right now. We can go on to the next question, and I'll look it up. I'll see if I can put it in the chat.
And I just wanted to add a note to that too. Dan, I think when you see the program's history and how it started, it's always dealt with larger scale commercial properties. And those are the developments that are opting into site plans, especially those who are opting into the Green Building Incentive Program because of the additional height or density that has been offered throughout the program's history. But agreed with Vicky, maybe lower to mid-rise multifamily buildings may be the scale to start out with, and then kind of go from there. As we say, all it takes is one project to start, and then take off from there.
Now I'll ask my other stupid question. So my sort of limited experience with this is mainly coming from the site plan review committee meetings. And typically what I hear from folks around the table is they'll say, oh, this is LEED silver. I really wish this was gold. Can you guys consider that? The developer usually says, no, that's too expensive. They'll say, oh, you're going to be using gas generators for power in this building. You really should go all electric. And then they say, that's simply not feasible for this building. Then they'll say, can you add more biophilia to the site? That's something developers will usually come back and say, okay, we'll see what we can do to try to add more biophilic elements. With these changes, if I'm the developer and I'm being asked to take these steps that in the past I've said no to, what is different about this that is going to help me reconsider that decision and say, actually, I think I am going to make this building more energy efficient than otherwise I was planning, or switch to all electric?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that's valid. I think when you're going through a site plan review process, or you're going through a SPRC meeting, when you're dealing with asking for something that's more stringent or additional to a project, and maybe it's based on cost or from a feasibility or logistical standpoint of the project, whatever it may be that the developer may say, and that they have the right to say. But the difference between that and then what we're offering here in this proposal, I think, is the incentives, right? When you're dealing with not just bonus density, but when you're dealing with financial incentives now, using again the example of the climate adaptation pathway for FIAS, we're offering nominal incentives upfront to a maximum of 25,000 for the energy modeling and then the feasibility study. So I think that provides an attraction to developers to at least look into it, maybe opt into the process if the project is feasible for their new construction project and what they're designing, if they design it to FIAS standards. So I think the incentives play a role within that, but I think it also goes back to it's kind of the unfortunate cause and effect of when you work in a Dillon real estate. We can't unfortunately mandate these requirements because we're not a home real estate and we can't adopt our own local code. So I think when you're dealing with a voluntary program, or when you're going through an SPRC meeting and you're asking developers, is this all that you can do? Can you go, above and beyond on some of these projects, or can you implement more biophilic measures, or can you look into the feasibility of building electrification, whatever it may be? I think they're looking at that as, well, kind of what's in it for me. And if you attach an incentive to it, I think there's more of an attraction there, hopefully, from the developer perspective. Vicky, if you have anything else to add, you're going to speak before.
No, I think, it is a lot about the incentives. Some of these developers, though, too, they have ESG kind of corporate goals where they also want to participate in low carbon construction to meet those goals. And those commitments can also be things that drive them to do this kind of action. But yeah, that's I'm thinking of one developer in particular that I won't name with a company like that, and they're they're also kind of pushing back on some of this. So yeah, we'll see.
It also may be that, and again, we don't know. Well, if it's adopted, we'll have to see. But it may very well be that the greater attraction is for building owners and developers purchasing existing buildings and upgrading them. And that's a win, because some of these buildings go back to construction in 1965, 1975, and the code at that time was very, very regressive compared to what it is today in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So those older buildings tend to be really, really deep carbon wells in our community. So it may be that when you're talking about existing buildings where we know that absolute electrification is just not practical, that may be, and I say may in quotations, be a more dynamic element of the new model program, at least to start off with.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just imagine the financial incentives would probably need to be pretty generous. I'm just thinking like I have an 875 square foot condo that was built in 1950. I spent $11,000 to make it more energy efficient. Received only 10% more energy efficiency as a result of that. I will never recoup that investment. I will not live here long enough to ever see a return on that. But that was 11 grand for a tiny little condo, much less a multifamily building. So, and maybe it gets cheaper with scale, but yeah, it seems like to get developers to really buy in that if it's going to be a financial incentive, it's got to be it's got to have, quite a bit of money there. Unless it's appealing to some other interest that you have. Like you said, if it's ESG, they have certain goals that they're trying to meet as a corporation. But yeah, so I appreciate the presentation. I feel like I've learned a lot about the subject, and I appreciate the patience with helping folks like myself try to understand this better, because it's not an area that typically need to be super well versed in for the regular housing commission activities. I think I did see one other hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just one quick question. Sorry, I'm just, again, going back to the density bonus. So like looking at slide 16, new construction, climate, FES0 pathway, it's the 0.25 FAR plus some other things. So my question is, again, so if you, let's say we were to go from 0.25 to like, let's say 2, or like some really like high, like that really is not going to be an incentive to say, like, because that's, let's say like, okay, the 0.25 may not, like, 0.55 may not be like enough, but let's say you keep the same standards but raise the FAR to like 2, 3, like really give a super whatever to do that. Like, is that you don't anticipate uptake, or is that FAR capped because we're worried about, we just don't want to see that too many stories added to what we're seeing for
A lot of the developers don't want it, and that's why the FAR, the bonus density, has become a diminishing attraction as an incentive, or it's diminishing in its power as an incentive. Not in no small part because a lot of the new construction now is happening in that Pentagon City, Crystal City, National Landing Corridor, and because of its proximity to the airport, they simply can't build that high. They're limited. So, that's one. It's not the only factor, but the FAR is, all good things, have a lifetime, and they diminish over time. And at least right now, we're at a point where the FAR bonus density is ebbing as a compelling incentive. Would you say that's accurate, Paul and Vicky?
Yeah, agreed. And just to add to that, Jason, I think when you're looking at the types of site plan developments that come through the county on an average basis, and you're looking at the typical GFA, most of them are, again, still opting for the lower tiers because of the size and scale that they're building to. When you're dealing with a project like a Amazon HQ2 and that type of developer coming into the county, of course, that's a larger scale project, and they're putting more promises and different requirements into that from the county's perspective. But not every, that's also a commercial scale building and property development that went up. But when you're dealing with mostly multifamily and the typical sizes that we're seeing within the county, there's restrictions involved through zoning and other things like that. So most are, still opting for those lower tiers, and some may not use the bonus density either. So.
Thank you.
So I'd like to propose, since it sounds like this won't go to the county board until maybe March of next year. And Katie, let me know if you're okay with this, treating this as an information item tonight, inviting you all back. And so that we can get any updates to this as you continue your public engagement process, and then have it be an action item for when it's going to go to the county board.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I just want to quickly add, I am retiring from the county on the 14th of December. They do have my job position outposted. So until they have a new bureau chief in place, you are going to be obviously in excellent hands with Victoria and Paul.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I think Katie and I also talked about, even separately, just having maybe another information session so that we can get a little bit better versed on many of the things that came up tonight that for some of us were kind of the first time we may have heard about it, just so we can get better in sync with kind of what you all are working on, and how it impacts the work that we're doing. So I think we can try and look for opportunities next year to, increase our education and opportunities to engage with you all as well.
That'd be great.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the work that you're doing and for coming here tonight to present to us. Go ahead, Jason.
No, sorry, it's because the clapping hands. I'm not sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Clapping. There we
Sounds
go.
good.
Thank
So
you.
next item on our agenda is the 2025 work plan discussion. So the plan tonight is not to come up with the new work plan, but to talk about some of the things that folks would like to consider for it. So when Katie and I are putting together the draft of that for consideration at the January meeting, this will help inform what people want to see on that in the initial draft. I'd sent around maybe 6:15 tonight a annotated version of the 2024 work plan. I don't know how many people had a chance to see that. Happy to go over that if people feel like that would be helpful, just to get a sense of where we made progress this year versus where we have more work to do. So if people think that'd be helpful, happy to pull that up. Or we can just have a brainstorming session. Go ahead, Jason, unless you're clapping.
No, sorry. No, I think it may be helpful to go over. I just have like a couple things, like comments, like just like I think two main things. So, but I just want to like, but I did see that, and I think it's really helpful what you did. But I've like just a couple comments.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Alex, are you able to share your screen for that, or do you want me to pull it up?
Yes, I can share my screen.
Great. Thank you. And this is super subjective. This was just me going through and looking at, what we've done over the past year, and then trying to assign a label to it. So our first priority was maintaining and strengthening our role as the Chief Advisory Commission to the County Board on housing issues. So the first one, collaborate with staff to build on the Housing Commission's equity framework. I put this as needs work just because I don't think this was something we really focused on this year. We had the equity framework that we adopted last year. I think it was something that, as individual commissioners, we used, and staff has made some progress on, I think what they present to us and how they present, but it wasn't really a focus for this year, to kind of taking that a bit further. So that's why I put that as needs work. And I don't know if you guys want to run through each of these, or we can just go to where people have questions too. I don't know how many people actually had a chance to look at it before the meeting. That was a question for you all. Do you want me to run through each one, or just focus on areas where people have a question?
So, Kellen,
Maybe just go to questions, comments.
Yeah, how much does this change from year to year? I mean, it seems pretty comprehensive for a work plan that covers most of our goals, at least most of the things that I consider important.
So it can change as much as we want it to from year to year. The broad categories have, since I've been on the Housing Commission 3 years maybe, have pretty much stayed the same. But the bullet points underneath them have changed from year to year. Some continue on year after year. We've also changed the ranking of certain things. So, like A and B might have been flipped a different year or something. So it can change as much as we want it to. And it's meant to reflect, here are the things that we want to work on this year. And it's aspirational. So we typically know that we probably can't cover everything. but it's meant to give us some sense of, and especially for me, as I'm inviting folks to come and speak and potentially take action on things, to have a sense of, okay, this is what at the start of the year the commission said they wanted to focus on this year.
Hey, Kellen, I have, I looked at this briefly, and being a new member, and I'm just thinking out loud. Do we have anything about home ownership in here?
Yeah, under policy, we have, let's see.
And I was thinking mainly because of the home ownership study that's being done, and
The third bullet, I have that as accomplished.
a comprehensive review of the county's affordable. Okay, how about something about looking at ways to bring down the cost of home ownership, of buying a home, and as an aspirational goal? I'm just looking at the body politics and trying to beef this up based on the current issues we're dealing with.
We can certainly look at that for the 2025, specifically bringing down the cost of home ownership.
Right. Okay. Just stuff like that. So I was looking at that in the vein of of what is going on nationally, and not only national, state and local housing. It's a crisis. So I'm just looking at it from that lens.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Other questions based on this, or comments?
Yeah, sorry. I have a question about the EHO/missing middle. I know this is a very thorny topic. I know that the board said that they were planning to just appeal and go through that 1 to 3 year process, and not try to modify the policy so that it can be implemented more quickly. But they didn't really give a lot of details as to why they said they were going to do that. I was wondering if anyone has more insight, if there is any viable option to recommend that the board actually go through a different process, or if it's not even worth touching.
I mean, I think that's up to the commission. So I think after the decision first came down, we were kind of waiting, because Katie, you and I talked about this, like waiting to see, like, let's wait for the actual written decision to come out. Let's get a sense of like what that decision actually meant, and then decide, what, if any, recommendations we want to make to the county board. I mean, I know there are advocacy groups that are making recommendations to the board of like, here's how you can move forward with EHO, but also staying in line with what the judge had ruled. So if that is something that this commission is interested in exploring, we can definitely do that in 2025. My sense from staff is that they don't really want to talk about the case, and that there's sensitivity around kind of the topic based on questions that have come up, in the last 2 months, on other things, whether it's the homeownership study or other areas, and how the missing middle ruling would impact that. So I don't know that we're going to get a staff presentation on anything related to this. But that doesn't mean that the commission can't look into the issue and then make a recommendation, based on what the commissioners think the board, should do moving forward.
Yeah, I think that there's really not much we can do until the ruling is done. So like, I would probably suggest we just remove it, because I don't think we can do really anything with the EHO.
When are you saying the ruling, like the appeal process?
Yeah, like I feel like, I mean, it's going through appeal, and like until that process gets sorted out, potentially through appeals, and potentially, who knows how long, like whenever that's done, like whether it gets appealed or whatever, Supreme Court, like whatever, I don't think there's really anything we can do, because it's still like that's where it is. Like, we can't, I don't know if we can recommend moving forward, because like that's not, like, I don't think that's an option.
I mean, I think there there are things like people have said the judge had an issue with the delegation of authority to staff for the permitting process. So people have said, okay, get rid of the permitting process. Like, you don't need to have that. You don't have to put a cap on the number of EHO units that can be built. You could just, not have a cap, and then that complies with the judge's ruling. So there are a number of areas that, I've heard people say the county board could make these changes, not tomorrow, but they could come up with changes to the EHO, policy that would comply with the judge's ruling, that would allow them to move forward while the appeal was happening. Whether or not this commission supports any of those, I don't know, because we haven't talked about it. But I think there are options that we could, and if people want to have a discussion about that, we can do that. We can invite outside groups to come talk to us about, various perspectives on what the board could do. If people think that that's something that we should concern ourselves with next year.
If that's the case, then yeah, I could be with, if that, I just, I think that, yeah, if that's the case, then maybe that could be good if that's the case.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we'll mark it as something to consider for the work plan. Again, we're just brainstorming ideas, and then we'll make final decisions next month about what to include.
Yeah, and Count, do you mind if a couple more things real quick?
Yep.
So if you scroll down to the bottom of page 2 about examining opportunities to increase supply of rental housing in the county. So the two things I think want to add there potentially is one is look at building code. And so the first thing is just to update the Virginia Housing Commission released their final report on the single stair. And what it's not like, yes, we're moving forward. No, we're not going to do it, increase the allowable height, beyond the 3 stories. But one of the potential options, I guess, kind of is to go through the building code process to make it 4 stories through the ICC code, which could go in effect, I believe, 2027, based on the 2024 ICC International Building Code, IBC. So I think that for low density residential, that could be something that is, bring in a person to talk about that and the code change or what as that process continues. And the second one is, this was mentioned at the legislative session, county board member, oh my gosh, of Susan Cunningham brought it up about building code changes to, this could apply to small, medium, and large buildings to do, like, especially for conversions, about like building code in terms of like bedrooms, like maybe not having full access to a window or things like that, to allow for like SROs or other options. So I think that could be added. And then I just have a question on, sorry, one more thing. I think C2E2, I think that good to keep working with them. And I think also maybe work with them in terms of the transportation and housing, and look at, perhaps parking in terms of green buildings, look at, different, maybe that could be tied into that process as we go through our transportation update. And then question on the fair housing plan, are we, like, because when I see Alexandria, I know like Alexandria signed on, are we signed on the same way? Like we're committing to that? Like I'm not sure if we are.
You're talking about the regional fair housing plan?
Yeah, like I know Alexandria is, but like, did we officially sign on to that, or like?
Yeah, the county board adopted the regional fair housing plan in July of 2023, and also the specific Arlington County goals.
Okay, great. Okay, I think that'd be good too, to keep that on there. So, okay, sorry, that's a lot of things. Sorry, just wanted.
Yeah, and with an update on fair housing, so we will be inviting the Office of Human Rights to present to us at our January meeting to talk about fair housing enforcement and answer a number of the questions that were not answered last month. And we also invited HUD to come talk at that meeting as well about the Fair Housing Assistance Program, which the county, as part of the Fair Housing Plan, said that they would look into becoming a FAP. And so my hope is that HUD will also be able to join us to talk about, here's the program, here's how you become a Fair Housing Assistance Program, here are the benefits. And we'll also have the county office responsible for doing those investigations and doing that work there to talk about, the work that they're currently doing, as well as plans to potentially become a fair housing assistance program. So that is slated for our January meeting at this point.
I had
Other
another.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think some of the things that are already in this plan from this year that we, that say like needs work, I think some of those are important to me that I think I would love to see us work on, such as especially incorporating more diverse voices in, planning processes, as well as like tenant organizing, hearing more from advocacy groups or tenant groups. I think that's, obviously like challenging, but like would be a great goal to work on. Would love to hear, I don't know if this is a thing that we do, but like if there are any advocacy or tenant groups that want to come speak to us and just share like what are their main concerns or priorities. I'd be really curious to hear that, if anyone has connections like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can certainly, I mean, there's a coordination element with staff and the county board like liaisons, but yeah, we can invite, just like I'm inviting HUD to come and talk to us. We can invite, Bugada or other tenant organizing groups to come and talk to us about what they are seeing and what is important to them. I know Bugada has, like, they frequently talk to the Tenant Landlord Commission about what they're seeing and what they think is important, but we can certainly invite them to come to our commission or other groups as well.
Great.
Other questions or items that people think are important, things that are not on here that folks are interested in for next year? Go ahead, Karen.
So I think I read something in Arlington Now about how the commissions are not very diverse. Did someone else read that article? How we're all homeowners, we're all kind of look the same and all that other wonderful stuff. So is that something we should be concerned with?
So I would say that the county board controls the makeup of commission. So they send, people apply through the online system. The board liaisons will send that to the chair. Typically, this is a typical process. It's not true for every commission. Like economic development, apparently they decide which candidates get to move forward or not. For housing, I will interview folks and then I will share my thoughts about those folks with the county board liaisons, and then ultimately they will make a decision. So right now we have one vacancy. I've interviewed a couple of folks and shared my thoughts, and it's up to the county board to decide when and if they want to appoint someone, to fill that vacancy. So yeah, as a chair, I can say, I think we need more people who have the following expertise or experience. And one of those things that I've said to them is I think we need more housing finance, like background and expertise on the housing commission. And, we'll talk about, we need more diversity in many different ways too on the commission. Ultimately, it's up to them to decide though who they want. Yeah, we don't typically actively recruit folks, that hasn't really been a responsibility of commissioners. And from a bandwidth perspective, I don't know that I'd want to take that on. But yeah, I that is something that people talk about. I know the board, talks about we need diversity, and we need, equitable. We need to make sure that the voices who represent the table represent our commitment to equity. But that's really, in my view, a county board thing as opposed to the commissions themselves.
Okay, just thank you for clarifying that. I was wondering if, half of us have to resign or something, but okay.
Go ahead, Danny.
So I'm not sure if this is part of the like C2E2 collaboration effort or not, but I was thinking about more like climate resilience and some of the work that can be done with local governments and FEMA. But in order to get funding for housing through those programs, it has to be like a little bit more proactive, where local government has to be part of their like their disaster management plans. So like I said, I don't know if that's kind of baked into the whole collaboration effort with C2E2, but I do think that there is an opportunity for housing funding kind of working from the federal level down through to the local level through
Are you
FEMA
thinking,
as one example.
are you thinking specifically for affordable housing or just for any residential? Building?
Generally, from what I've understood so far, it's mostly specifically to affordable housing, but I think it can be for housing if it's incorporating mitigation efforts towards, anticipated disasters caused by climate change.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Just an administrative question. When is our January meeting?
The 16th.
Okay, thanks.
And we should, Alex, when we won't have the final schedule for next year until early January. Is that accurate?
Yeah, county board approves their yearly schedule at their organizational meeting, which happens the first week of January. So they're not finalized until then, but I think they are pretty much set in, they're kind of set. They just need to be approved. The dates for next year are in the work plan document that I sent out. So the updated dates are in there.
Yeah, I will say though, just be careful if you're adding things to your calendar, because I have run into before where I've used the draft one, and then it turns out that the board actually changed one of the meeting dates, and that changed our commission meeting date, and then I had the wrong thing on my calendar, and it threw me off for a month. But yeah, so just they could change, and sometimes they do. They'll decide for like a random month for whatever reason to change the date. Other questions or things that you would like us all to focus on? We didn't end up doing a field trip this year. I know we talked about that, trying to do in-person field trip to like a affordable housing property. Is that something that people still want to keep on for 2025? Is something that we can try to do?
Yeah, hey, Kellen, haven't done that a month ago or a month and a half ago, I would highly recommend it. It opened my eyes to a lot of things.
Could we tour I know it's not finished yet, but Marbella? I know that's like the most recent book. Is that available to? I don't know, it's hard hat, or I don't know if we could, as it's getting done, or.
We can certainly ask.
I don't think it's done. I have been riding my bicycle by there and it's a major construction site. I would not want to enter that building.
Yeah, very major. I live near. It's very major.
Let's wait for it to be done.
You got to wait until the big crane is down. The big bird crane is still up there. Once that's down, it will probably be safe.
Also, if we could piggyback with the CDBG people or something so that we're not like a burden on like organizing these. It's kind of a big deal to organize these trips. Can we piggyback with somebody else?
We can ask. Okay. Another item that I feel like we didn't make as much progress on this year, but we talked about doing more educational sessions, just about topics that we wanted to be more informed on. And I think that kind of stemmed from the county just giving us those info briefings on the affordable housing ordinance, not this year, but the previous year. Is that something that folks are, still interested in? I know it can be tough because our agenda gets quite full, and we were supposed to be done earlier than this, but we're still meeting. But is that something that you all want to prioritize for next year?
Yes, from my perspective.
If so, I would recommend that folks come prepared to the January meeting with specific educational topics that you want us to cover, and that way it'll be easier for me when I'm working with staff to try to schedule this, instead of trying to figure out what topics people want. We just have a list in there that I can just try to check off.
Do you have like a glossary? I mean, or not a glossary, but like so many of these things have been brought up before. Are they recorded? Like something that we could just refer to? Like the affordable housing master plan, that kind of stuff has been sort of really been, I mean, there's so many new people on this commission, but for some of us that have been around, not that we don't want them to come back, but is there some way that we could like say, oh, here's the presentation from 2 years ago or something?
And we have been doing that. Like, I know we've been doing that with the affordable housing ordinances, with new folks. Alex developed the onboarding briefing for the commission earlier this year. So I think we've taken steps in that direction. And if it's post-COVID, we should have recordings of it. If it's pre-COVID, we probably don't. But we could try and go back and sort of catalog some of those. The one downside is that if people have specific questions, they won't be able to ask them, if it's just watching a recording. But yeah, certainly, staff get many requests to do briefings, and we want to minimize the amount of extra time they have to spend. Okay. Any other items that people want to focus on that may not be listed here? Or is there anything on here that you don't think that we should try and focus on for next year? Okay. I will add that I reached out to Ann Venetia to get a list of what CPHC, like housing divisions, housing major priorities will be for next year, so that, if there's a major study that's going to be happening, or things that they know, like, hey, we're going to want the Housing Commission to provide input and be involved in this, that we'll have that for our January meeting, so we can look at incorporating those things as well. And I will also talk to county board members to see if there's anything that they want us to think about going into next year. They won't set their liaisons, I think, until also the January meeting. But we can still ask and get a sense of what they think might be important for us to look at. Okay, if there's no other questions, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is development updates.
Yes, so there are no development updates tonight, except for just the meeting calendar here. And we are actually pretty set, except there is a Melwood on December 19th that Kellen is the rep for but can't attend. So if there's an alternate for that, that would be great. But other than that, we are currently covered for the meetings.
Can anyone make the December 19th meeting for Melwood?
If that's virtual, I can probably serve as an alternate. I will be in California.
It can be virtual, like you can tune in virtually for it.
Yeah, if you need an alternate, I can do that. That's fine. You can sign me up.
Okay. And I guess I'll give a quick update on Melwood since we had the first SPRC meeting, I think last month. So it's currently a training center for individuals with, I think it's intellectual disabilities, and they're in an old school, and some claim it's historic because I guess it was one of the last Arlington schools to integrate. I don't know. I mean, like all the schools had integrated at some point. Whatever. That's for a different commission to figure out if they think it's actually historic. The neighborhood is very much opposed to it, and they feel like it is too tall, too dense. Will just like destroy the neighborhood. I was very supportive of it. It's much needed affordable housing. It's less than 20 minutes to the nearest metro station. To me, it seems like this is the type of place where we want to, build more affordable housing. You had some of the neighbors saying like, we don't need more affordable housing in Arlington because we have like crystal houses and that's going to bring a bunch. And so we're set. We don't need more. I very much disagreed with that. I feel like most of the SPRC was supportive of the project. But yeah, the neighborhood association member was unhappy that people were not opposed to the project. But I also feel like that's almost every one of these types of projects now, is that you have the local neighbors who hate it and other people saying this is great for the community overall. And they go through the process together. So that's kind of where that stands. The Hotel Pentagon SPRC, I attended that first one as well. That is not affordable housing. It's right on the edge of the Green Valley Civic Association, and it's just a regular redevelopment of the site. The only issue that I really had with it was they said that they made like architectural and other choices for the site to make it represent and kind of echo the character and history of Green Valley. And I was like, you just made some of the bricks white and some brown. Like, I don't really see how this reflects anything in the neighborhood. And also Green Valley had a number of things that they had been asking for the site that it didn't sound like the developer was really paying a whole lot of attention to. So not necessarily opposing the site, but just asking for like, hey, can you incorporate this or incorporate that into it? So that was more, my main recommendation was just like try to work more closely with Green Valley on what they're looking for and try to incorporate some of the things that they're asking for, because they seem fairly reasonable. And especially for one of our historically Black neighborhoods in Arlington, we don't want to just play lip service. Like the church right next door, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech. So like, there's actual like history for this site that I felt like wasn't really incorporated into, I think what I said looked like every other new building in America. So it, no offense to those architects, but yeah. And I think a lot of the comments were kind of echoed that feedback. So we'll see what the applicant decides to do, if anything.
Are they pursuing a green building on this? Because this looks like a good spot to do it by the highway.
I think it was. I don't remember what it specifically, like what the certification was, but I think it was LEED something. But yeah, there were more requests for like biophilia stuff and a lot of concerns around transportation. Like the like just entering the building and just the one road that it was mainly going to affect. They're like, it's already basically just completely gridlocked during certain times of the day, and you're going to add like 400 units, and it's just going to make it even more impossible. So that was a thing that, you know, also got a lot of the attention and discussion during the meeting. Were there any other SBRCs that folks attended they want to update us on, or were those the only two in the last like month?
Yeah, those were the only ones since our last meeting.
Okay. Sorry, anything else that you had, Alex, for development updates?
Nope, that's it for development updates.
Okay, and then last we have any committee or subcommittee and liaison reports. Which would be home ownership, which I don't think there's anything. Karen, yep.
Tomorrow night, whatever I think is the deadline for putting your comments into the feedback mechanism, in case you have strong feelings, now or never.
Joe, have you been able to get connected with the HRLRB or HALRB?
No, and not yet. Does anyone have a contact for me, or I'll just go online? And...
Yeah.
Yes,
Alex,
I can contact you.
Okay.
Contact.
Yeah, Alex, if you could send me that, that would be great. Thanks.
And the liaison, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And anything with C2E2 that you want to talk about, Katie, other than
No,
the
just
big
what we did
discussion we
today.
had? Okay. Cool. Well, thank you all. Meeting is adjourned. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas to those who celebrate. And we'll see you in January.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a good night.
Thank you.